Hello and welcome to this section. In this section, let's learn about generating objects. Related and contents. Generating objects is actually the operation of objects we introduced to you earlier. In this section, we mainly include the following knowledge points, namely, the operation of objects and the demonstration of our object operation. Then we will talk about a special form in the canvas, our movement, and finally we will make a comprehensive case for you with our generated object and our movement. First, let's come to the first point. Object operation mainly includes the following object operation modes. They are the first copy object, which can operate a copy object for an object group, which is of great help in our game. For example, if we want to repeatedly fire bullets, or repeatedly generate enemies, we can use the operation of copying objects. Then the second point is that we can select multiple objects. Generally speaking, for example, we can use event to select specific multiple objects, and then operate together. When we cooperate with its custom property, we can directly and conveniently operate a part of the objects we want to operate. Then there is another part, that we can use event to randomly select an object in a certain range under the canvas. Then, for such duplicate objects, we can select multiple objects and randomly select multiple objects. How can we use them in the canvas? Then, we will cut off these figures, and we will make a demonstration 11 by 1. Then, we will make a demonstration 1 by 1 basic demonstration operation. First of all, open our editor. We reform the application name to be our living object, and then click a Create button. You can see that the basic definition here is to provide several operation modes under the canvas. So if we need to carry out an object operation, it must be carried out in the canvas environment. So we develop good habits. We first add a page under the front end. Let's add a canvas in the page. At present, we are in a relatively positioning environment, and its default width and height is 100%, so we don't need to draw a second time. Then let's go to the first point. The first point is to copy objects. You can use object groups to copy objects. Since it is a copied object, we must first find a basic 1A template, right? So please note that when we copy an object, the most basic thing is that we first make a template for it. Here we make a very simple template. We draw a rectangle here. We also set a color and a width and height of such a rectangle slightly. We set its XY separately for 0 and 0, we set the width to a 92, and the height to a 150. Then, similarly, we set its background color to black, and then click Finish. In this way, our most basic template is made, and our template is also made. Now let's perform a series of operations such as copying objects. Let's take a look. If we want to copy an object, what is our usual operation process? First, we will make a template, and then we will select the canvas or canvas, inner and container widget as our target object, and then select the event of creating an object in our drop-down menu, and then we need to give it the difference value. How can we understand this content? First, let's make a template. We've already made it. Then, we select the canvas or the container in the canvas. We know what the container in the canvas contains. We can see, when we select the canvas, what other containers are there. You can see that the container is placed separately, including one on our side A page, including our container, including our object group, is a container, so it has such an event. We will give a demonstration later. For example, now we select the canvas to perform such an operation. When this button is clicked, we select our canvas and let it execute what content in the drop-down menu. We create an object as an event, and then it will let us choose a template. If there is a template here, we can choose our rectangle. We can also see that when we choose our rectangle, it will load a series of elements, and what is the series of elements? When we select our rectangle back, we can see whether it contains all its properties. So when we choose such a creation object, it will automatically release all the property in the template object. Why does it allow us to release the property? This is because it allows us to modify a difference value of such an object we create here. So we come to the last step, that is, when we copy an object, we can choose to modify its difference value. If there is such a necessity, here we will modify its difference value. Why should we modify one? Because if we don't modify it now, we can't see whether such a rectangle is created or not, right? So we are here to modify a difference value. We change its x to a position of 150, and we change its y-axis to a position of 150. When we click the button, we trigger the action of creating an object on the canvas, and then we create such an object through a template like ours. Let's preview the effect. Then now to our top, sometimes you can see that he has created a new rectangle in our position. So come here, let's review our practice of creating objects. Let's understand this sentence again, that is, he said that when he selects the canvas, or the container in the canvas, he has the action of creating objects. Let's go back to see. When we select the canvas now, it has the action of creating objects. Let's add an object group in the canvas. Then we also select an object group like ours to hold. We are selecting an object group like ours. Does anyone in the drop-down menu of the object group like ours have our creation to create an object is an action? Therefore, as long as we select our canvas, or the container widget of the canvas through the event, we can have the action of creating an object. So here we will duplicate the process of creating an object or copying an object. First, we will make a template, and then select us to draw in the action the container widget in the canvas or cloth, and then in the drop-down menu of the target object, we choose to create an object as an event, and then in the event, we can modify its difference value. Then we will talk about the next object operation, which is an action like our selection object. We can see how it works. In our World panel, in the drop-down menu of the target object, we can select multiple objects, and then set the object conditions we want to select. Then we can set or remove the property of the selected object. Here, in order to facilitate everyone's understanding, I'll make a modification here, modify a color here, and change it into our big red. Then, this is completed. So, is an object created by us a big red? Because let's see, when I click, I can see that a big red rectangle is generated here, and then what operation do I want to do next? This is our first button. Let's pull another rectangle next to us. What do you do? When we click the rectangle next to us, through event, we will delete the red box. How to do this? Similarly, add event for such a rectangle. When it is clicked, how do I choose the red box? In fact, we just said that there is such an event in the drop-down menu of selecting objects, which is called selecting multiple objects. Here we go to select multiple objects. For such a target object, we can see that there is a target range on its side. For this target range, we directly select a thing in our canvas. What is the object type? Everyone here must pay attention. The object type here means that if your object type is selected as rectangle, you can also see it. Here we select the object type as rectangle, then at present, all rectangles are of such an object type. For example, if we select the object type as a rectangle, we can see what the types of the three properties are. It's all rectangular. We can see it through the icon, right? There is a square in front, so if I choose an action directly here next, and we remove it, what will happen to the current object? He will remove all of our meetings. Let's see the effect. When I click on the left, do I generate another rectangle here? When I click this button, I can see that it removes all the events in our whole screen. Therefore, we must pay attention to the fact that the object type here is to directly select the type of widget. In fact, the type of this widget already contains such an icon in front of it. As long as it is the same icon, it can be processed in batches. But in a condition on our side, do we want to remove the color whose background color is equal to red? Therefore, one of the conditions for us to choose it here is that its background color is equal to a big red. Let's directly copy a color code here. So if the color code is big red, we will remove it again. So let's preview it here and have a look again. When I generate a big red rectangle, I can click on the right side to see a big red rectangle, and it will disappear. But some students will ask, in case what I generate here is also a black, but I want to remove the black one, what should I do? This is also possible. Let's give you a simple demonstration here. For example, I empty a background here, but it must have a very special sign before we can remove it. But if all the contents you generate, including its color, width and XYZ, are exactly the same, how do you move them out? We define its user-defined ID as 1. Then we come to the holding side, and we make a preview for the condition that the custom ID equals to E. You can see that when I generate, a rectangle here has exactly the same property as the rectangle here, but it has a custom ID, and is equal to 1. When I click this event, I can remove the rectangle with the custom ID equal to 1. Now that we have understood how to select multiple objects, it will be easier for us to understand the random selection of objects. In fact, it makes a random selection without any conditions on the original basis. This is an action like this. Similarly, in our drop-down menu, we change it to randomly select multiple objects. Here we change it to a rectangle in the canvas. We randomly select one. Then here, we don't need any conditions. Then, we randomly select one to remove it. Let's preview it directly 1, and then when I clicked, he removed himself because he held it himself, right? This is still very special. Let's click remove to remove the left. Remove him to remove this. Remove him to remove himself. Similarly, if you want to set some property on it, you can also add a property restriction that meets the conditions here, and then this is the 3 basic ways of our object operation, these 3 basic ways, and there are at least 2 lessons for the big family to consolidate and review in our follow-up. Then we will learn a very powerful property in the allocation, that is, our movement is actually a foundation for us to do various games, and then the definition of movement is like this, that is to add the effect of linear movement under the canvas, which is a basic animation widget. Given the initial speed and acceleration of the direction of movement, it can let the negative object carry out linear motion. Note that the negative object carries out linear motion and realizes corresponding acceleration or deceleration under the influence of acceleration. Then, by controlling the direction of our velocity and acceleration, we can make the object move approximately parabola. However, as long as our acceleration direction is inconsistent with our motion direction, it will form a parabola. This is what everyone should know about physics. Next, let's talk about how to use our sports. For example, on our side, we delete a redundant series of elements first, and we add a motion to such a rectangle, because how do we add a motion to it? We can see that when we select such a rectangle, there is a villain on the left, in addition to our track and slow motion. What is this villain? This villain is actually a movement. Please note that the objects in our canvas are all additive. In other words, if you add such a movement to it, it will have such a movement property, and the movement will become its additional property. For example, there is no motion attribute for this rectangle. When I select such a motion, I can add motion to it under the rectangle. How can I add it? There is a moving speed, a speed direction, an acceleration direction to start, delay, autoplay, auto-delete, etc. operation. Then here we give him a moving speed. Let's take a look here. We give a 600, and then we let him go to an automatic play. Let's directly preview to see one of the effects. We can see that he ran directly and ran at a speed of 600 pixels per second. So what does this mean? So the property of movement speed can determine the speed of its running. When we don't fill in the velocity direction, we can find that it is a default right direction, and it is a counterclockwise direction. Therefore, if we want it to move vertically downward, we need to give it a 90-degree. Let's see an effect. You can see that now it will move vertically downward. This is our 90 degrees. If it's left, it's 180 degrees. If it's up, it's 270 degrees or 90 degrees. Okay, next, let's talk about a knowledge point, which is often used in Canvas, that is, the effect of contact between 2 objects. What is contact? Similarly, let's add a rectangle on the canvas here. Let's put this rectangle below. Let's change the name to a failure area. What is a failure area? If this thing hits here, It proves that your game has failed. So what is our overlap? Overlapping is actually a very basic event. We select our rectangle, and there is such an event called start overlap in its trigger event. When we select start overlap, it will let us select an overlapping object, and the overlap area on this side will be selected as a failure area. Then, if it fails, we will let one of our application systems make a debugging record. What is the debugging record called failure? Let's read it again to see an effect. Here we open the check. You can see that a failure pops up here. Let's refresh it again. You can see that when it touches, the failure on this side will be displayed. So this event is also very simple, that is, we add an event to an object, and its overlapping object is selected as the overlapping object of a target, and then it can trigger such an event, so that our preparations are completed, and after the preparations are completed, we will make an application that we actually need to complete today.